Be me, Rebecca, 34, high school English teacher. Absolutely love my job because I get to challenge outdated thinking. Been teaching for 8 years now, always prided myself on creating an inclusive, progressive classroom environment. This year's junior class has been weird, though. Boys seem weirdly antisocial, always clustering together, avoiding any mixed gender activities. Girls constantly complaining that boys won't participate in group discussions, won't even look at them during presentations. Decide this calls for some investigation. Design anonymous survey about classroom dynamics and social interactions. Tell myself I'm being a good educator, identifying barriers to learning. Distribute it on a Friday. Tell kids to be completely honest since it's anonymous. Expect to uncover some typical teenage drama, maybe some shyness issues I can address. Spend weekend excited to read responses and implement solutions. Monday morning, sitting in my empty classroom before first period, start reading through the surveys. First few responses from girls are predictable complaints about boys being rude and standoffish. Then I get to the boys' responses. What the actual hell? First boy writes, I sit in the back corner because if I sit near girls, someone might say I was looking at them wrong or breathing on them weird. Last year, my friend Jake got suspended because a girl said he made her uncomfortable by asking to borrow a pencil. Roll my eyes. Obviously an exaggeration. Keep reading. Getting more and more disturbed by what these boys are writing. Another response. Group projects with girls are impossible. They either do all the work and then complain we didn't contribute, or they expect us to do everything and then say we're mansplaining if we take initiative. My older brother got kicked out of his college study group because a girl said he was creating a hostile environment by suggesting they meet at the library instead of someone's dorm. I'd rather get a 0. Starting to feel really uncomfortable now. These boys are painting girls as some kind of threat. Where are they getting these ideas from? Keep reading, hoping to find some reasonable responses. I don't make eye contact with female teachers or students because my dad told me even looking wrong can be misinterpreted. 3 boys at my middle school got in trouble for sexual harassment just for staring too long during presentations. I look at my desk or the wall now. This is insane. These boys have been completely brainwashed by toxic masculinity and anti-feminist propaganda. Obviously, their fathers and older brothers are filling their heads with this paranoid nonsense. Another survey. Dating is literally impossible for our generation. Every conversation can be screenshot and posted online if you say something wrong. Every compliment can be called harassment. Every text can be shown to friends and analyzed for red flags. I saw what happened to Marcus last year when that girl posted their entire text conversation on Instagram because he asked her out twice. Everyone called him a creep, and he had to delete all his social media. Why would I ever risk that? Getting genuinely angry now. These boys are being taught to see normal female behavior as threatening. They're being conditioned to avoid healthy interactions with the opposite gender. This is exactly the kind of toxic thinking that perpetuates the patriarchy. Response after response following the same pattern. I've seen boys get destroyed over nothing. One complaint can ruin your entire future. Colleges look at social media now, and if there's any accusation of impropriety, you're done. My cousin got kicked out of his honors program because a girl he rejected said he was stalking her, even though he just happened to have similar classes. Absolutely fuming by this point. These boys have been poisoned against women. They're living in some fantasy world where females are predators waiting to destroy their lives. They need to understand that women face real threats, not these imaginary persecution scenarios. Decide to address this head-on in class. Plan a whole lesson about dismantling toxic masculinity and fear-based thinking. Going to show them statistics about actual harassment and assault. Going to explain how their paranoia is actually harmful to female students. Tuesday morning, feeling confident and prepared. Start class by acknowledging, I read their surveys. I want to address some concerning attitudes I noticed in your responses about gender dynamics. Immediately notice boys shifting uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact even more than usual. The fear and avoidance you described isn't based in reality. It's based on toxic messaging that teaches you to see women as threats instead of equals. Raise my hand to interrupt, but I continue. These paranoid fantasies about false accusations and social media persecution are actually harmful to your female classmates who are just trying to learn in a safe environment. Notice boys exchanging glances. One boy, Tyler, actually raises his hand. Miss Rebecca, with respect, these aren't fantasies. My friend David is sitting right here, and he can tell you what happened to his brother. David looks terrified, but Tyler nods encouragingly. My brother was captain of debate team, had early admission to state, full scholarship. A girl in his AP history class said he made inappropriate comments during study group. No proof, no witnesses backing her story. School investigated, decided to err on side of caution. Scholarship gone, admission rescinded. Had to transfer schools his senior year. Clearly an exaggerated story, but I decide to address the underlying issues. Even if that story is completely accurate, which I doubt, one incident doesn't justify treating all women like potential threats. Several boys start talking at once. Have to restore order. Another boy, Marcus, speaks up. Miss Rebecca, you asked for honesty in the survey. We were honest. I personally know 6 guys who've had their lives messed up by accusations. Maybe the accusations were true, maybe not, but the results were immediate and permanent. Nobody waits for due process anymore. Getting frustrated with their stubborn adherence to these victim narratives. You're missing the point entirely. Your fear is causing you to perpetuate the very systems that harm women. Your avoidance and paranoia creates a hostile environment for female students. Tyler again. But Miss Rebecca, how is avoiding interaction hostile? We're not bothering anyone. We're not being aggressive. We're just staying away. Isn't that better than accidentally making someone uncomfortable? This question stops me cold for a moment. They're not being overtly misogynistic. They're just withdrawing completely. But that's almost worse because it's passive-aggressive. Your withdrawal is a form of hostility because it denies female students equal participation in their education. Boy named Jake raises hand. What if we're protecting them too? What if by avoiding interaction, we're preventing misunderstandings that could hurt everyone involved? Isn't it better to be safe? Getting more frustrated. Safe for who? You're making women feel excluded and unwelcome in their own classrooms. But, another boy chimes in, didn't you just say our presence makes them feel unsafe? So, if our presence is threatening and our absence is excluding, what exactly are we supposed to do? Pause, realizing they're actually making a logical point that I can't easily refute. But I know they're wrong, even if I can't immediately explain why. The solution isn't avoidance, it's education and respect. You need to learn appropriate ways to interact. Tyler, we tried that. That's exactly what got everyone in trouble. Being appropriate is apparently subjective. What one person thinks is appropriate, another thinks is harassment. So we decided to err on the side of caution. Another boy. Plus, Miss Rebecca, if we're in a group project and the girls do all the work, we get accused of being lazy. If we take initiative, we get accused of being controlling. If we suggest ideas, we're mansplaining. If we don't contribute, we're useless. There's literally no winning move, except not playing. Starting to feel like I'm losing control of this discussion. These boys have clearly rehearsed these arguments. They're probably sharing anti-feminist talking points online. You're creating a false dilemma. There are appropriate ways to collaborate. Like what specifically? Asks David. The question hangs in the air. Realize I don't have concrete examples that address their concerns. Everything I might suggest could theoretically be misinterpreted if taken in bad faith. Decide to pivot to broader principles. Look, the real issue here is that you've internalized a victim mentality that prevents you from seeing women as full human beings. Murmurs around the classroom. We do see them as full human beings, says Marcus. That's why we're taking their concerns seriously. When girls say certain behaviors make them uncomfortable, we listen and adjust. When they say male attention can be threatening, we minimize male attention. We're literally doing exactly what we've been told to do, feeling cornered by their logic but knowing they're fundamentally wrong. But your adjustment has gone too far. You're overcorrecting. How do we know when we've corrected enough? Asks Tyler. Who decides what's the right amount of interaction? And what happens if we guess wrong? Bell rings. Ending class. Boys file out quietly, leaving me standing there with a growing sense of unease. Girls stay after to complain about how hostile the boys were being during discussion. They're so defensive and weird, says Emma. It's like they hate us. Spend my planning period trying to process what just happened. Boys made coherent arguments that I couldn't easily dismantle. But I know their position is wrong, even if I can't articulate exactly why. Decide to do some research and come back stronger tomorrow. That evening, start looking up statistics and studies to counter their arguments. Instead, find articles about rising anxiety among teenage boys. Surveys showing young men feeling increasingly isolated. Studies about risk-averse behavior in academic and social settings. Data about declining romantic relationships among Gen Z. getting more frustrated because this research seems to support their claims, but I know they're misinterpreting everything through their victim lens. Decide to focus on classroom management solutions instead. Next day, announce new policy: mandatory mixed-gender group assignments. To ensure equal participation and break down artificial barriers. Immediate resistance from boys. "Miss Rebecca," says Tyler, "you can assign us to groups, but you can't make us participate meaningfully. We'll just sit there and let the girls do whatever they want so we don't accidentally cause problems. That's not acceptable. You're required to contribute equally." "How will you measure equal contribution?" asks David. "And what happens if our female group mates feel like our contributions are inappropriate or unwelcome?" Realize I'm back to the same logical trap. If I punish boys for not participating, I'm forcing unwanted interaction. If I require participation, I'm putting them in the exact position they're trying to avoid. We'll establish clear guidelines for appropriate collaboration. Spend next 20 minutes trying to create specific rules. Quickly realize that any concrete guideline can be interpreted multiple ways. Boys point this out repeatedly, asking for clarification on edge cases. Marcus raises hand. "Miss Rebecca, what if I suggest an idea and my female groupmate says it made her uncomfortable? Do I get in trouble for making the suggestion, or does she get in trouble for refusing to engage with the idea?" Another impossible question. Either answer reinforces their point about no-win scenarios. "You're overthinking this. Just be respectful." But how do we know if we're being respectful if we can't ask for clarification without that question itself potentially being disrespectful? Class ends with me feeling completely frustrated. Boys have somehow turned every attempt at guidance into evidence supporting their position. Girls are frustrated because boys aren't engaging. Everyone's unhappy and I don't know how to fix it. Over the next few weeks, try different approaches. Bring in guest speakers about healthy relationships. Boys listen politely, ask no questions, make no comments. Assign reflection essays about gender dynamics. Boys write perfectly appropriate but completely superficial responses that reveal nothing. Meanwhile, classroom atmosphere gets worse. Girls start complaining more loudly about feeling ignored and excluded. Boys become even more withdrawn. Academic performance declining because group work isn't functioning. Decide to try one-on-one conferences with some of the boys. Call Tyler in during lunch. "I want to understand your perspective better. Help me see where you're coming from." Tyler seems surprised by the non-confrontational approach. "Miss Rebecca, it's not that we hate women or want to exclude them. It's just that the stakes feel really high now. Like, if I say something wrong to a female classmate, it's not just between us anymore," she tells her friends. They post about it online, parents get involved, administration gets involved. Suddenly, I'm not just a stupid teenager who said something dumb. I'm an example of toxic masculinity that needs to be publicly addressed. Want to argue, but realize he might have a point about consequences being disproportionate. "But surely you can see how your avoidance affects female students." "Yeah, and I feel bad about that. But I feel worse about potentially ruining my own life. Maybe that's selfish, but I didn't create this situation." Ask him what would need to change for him to feel comfortable interacting normally. "Honestly, I'd need to know that minor social mistakes wouldn't become major life consequences. I'd need to know that if I accidentally say something that bothers someone, we could just talk about it privately and move on. But that's not how things work anymore." Similar conversations with other boys reveal the same pattern. They're not necessarily wrong about the consequences being severe. They're just prioritizing their own risk management over female students' social needs. From their perspective, they're being rational. Start to realize that my usual approaches aren't working because boys aren't being irrational. They've done a cost-benefit analysis and decided avoidance is optimal. Attacking their logic isn't effective because their logic isn't actually flawed. Weeks pass, situation doesn't improve. Receive email from principal asking about complaints from parents. Apparently girls' parents are saying, "Boys in my class are creating hostile environment." Boys' parents are saying their sons are being unfairly pressured to interact in ways that make them uncomfortable. Called into meeting with principal and guidance counselor. Explain situation. Show survey responses. Principal reads through them, looking increasingly concerned. "Rebecca, these responses suggest a significant breakdown in normal social development. These boys are describing extreme risk-averse behavior that goes beyond normal teenage awkwardness." Guidance counselor nods. "I've seen similar patterns in other classes. Boys who refuse to participate in any mixed-gender activities, avoid eye contact with female staff, choose to fail assignments rather than potentially interact inappropriately. Principal continues, while I understand your frustration with their attitudes, we need to acknowledge that they're responding rationally to their perception of risk. If we want different behavior, we need to address their risk assessment, not just criticize their conclusions. Feel like everyone's missing the point, but their risk assessment is based on exaggerated fears and anti-feminist messaging. Principal looks uncomfortable. Rebecca, I've reviewed several incident reports from the past few years. The boys' concerns about severe consequences for minor social missteps aren't entirely unfounded. We have had situations where casual interactions escalated into formal complaints that had significant academic and social consequences. Guidance counselor adds, and with social media, these incidents don't stay contained to school. Students are dealing with public shaming and permanent digital records of teenage mistakes, starting to feel like I'm the only one who sees the bigger picture. So we're just going to validate their paranoia instead of teaching them to navigate normal social interactions? Principal, we're going to acknowledge that their concerns have some basis in reality while working to create an environment where appropriate interaction feels safer. That might mean adjusting some of our policies around complaint resolution and social media consequences. I realize with growing horror that my administration is essentially siding with the boys. They're treating the boys' avoidance as a reasonable response rather than a problem to be fixed. Over the following weeks, watch as principal implements new policies. Conflicts between students now handled through mediation rather than punishment. Social media policies updated to address harassment of students for alleged inappropriate behavior. Clearer guidelines for what constitutes actionable versus non-actionable complaints. Boys in my class start participating slightly more, but still remain cautious. They're waiting to see if the new policies actually protect them or if it's just window dressing. Girls remain frustrated but have less administrative support for complaints about boys being standoffish. Realize that the boys have essentially won. They identified a problem, proposed a solution, avoidance, and forced the system to adapt to their needs. They've successfully reframed their fear and withdrawal as rational risk management. Now the burden is on the school to create an environment where they feel safe to participate. Months later, reflecting on how this all played out, boys never changed their fundamental assessment of risk. Instead, they forced everyone else to acknowledge that their assessment was reasonable. They didn't overcome their fear. They made their fear everyone else's problem, and it worked. Most frustrating part is that they did it without ever being openly confrontational or disrespectful. They just calmly explained their position, stuck to their boundaries, and waited for adults to solve the problem. They turned their victimhood into a form of power. Girls in my class gradually adapted to the new dynamic, learned to work around boys' limitations rather than challenging them directly, formed their own study groups, did their own networking, stopped expecting male participation in mixed activities, essentially created parallel social structures. End of school year, reviewing how everything went. Test scores didn't significantly decline despite reduced collaboration. Discipline incidents involving gender conflicts dropped to nearly zero. Student stress levels decreased once expectations were clarified, but can't shake feeling that something fundamental was lost. Boys learned that they could avoid difficult social negotiations by claiming fear. Girls learned that their social needs were secondary to boys' comfort levels. Everyone learned that separation was easier than integration. Realized that the boys outsmarted me, not through superior arguments, but through superior patience. They were willing to accept short-term academic and social costs to achieve long-term risk reduction. They played a longer game than I was prepared for. Worst part is that I still can't articulate exactly what they did wrong. They were honest about their concerns. They proposed rational solutions. They accepted consequences for their choices. They didn't attack or demean anyone. They just refused to play a game they thought they couldn't win. And somehow that refusal became everyone else's problem to solve.